Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Dr. Cohen, for this opportunity to have a conversation. We've known each other for a while, and we wanted to start, I think I wanted to start with the book Stubborn Attachments, because as Mariana mentioned, we translated it into Spanish, and we have really used it in our lectures and conversations regarding poverty in Guatemala and what we can do to alleviate poverty. And it's a very powerful book. I think it's been very helpful to the work we do. And in that book, you do something really interesting. You do this some math, and you say it would take 110 years to triple the gross domestic product of a country if the annual growth rate is 1%. But GDP would grow or triple in only 22.5 years if the annual growth rate was 5%. And so that is very, I think, eye-opening to a lot of young people. That is why you recommend that economies should grow exponentially and not just, grow at a very slow rate. So what do you exactly mean by exponential growth, and why do you think exponential growth is an ethical imperative?
I think of exponential growth as growth on top of more growth. So say you're growing 3.5 percentage points a year. Every year, your economy gets 3.5% bigger, which is nice. But the second year of that, you're getting 3.5% on top of the whole package. The initial, what you had, plus the 3.5% of the first year of growth, and then you get 3.5% more on the total. So that, you could say, is the logic of compound growth or compound interest. If you simply wait and keep on doing it, you end up pretty rich, is the simple point. So I went back once and I looked at the history of Denmark. It's one of the nicer and richer European countries. They're not as free market as I would like, but they've done pretty well. And they don't have any years like China where they're growing 10%. The secret of Denmark was just not to have many losing years. Other than World War II, they pretty much just keep on growing at 2%, 3%, and just patience and growth, and you get somewhere really good. It's maybe a trivial point once you see it, but very little of the world actually operates on that basis. And that's what I think is a moral imperative. You can take people in a very poor situation and bring them into a quite excellent situation just by having your economy grow.
On that note, Professor Cohen, I was wondering, because people often assume that entrepreneurship in developing countries is basically about survival or about small informal businesses, but basically some of the most innovative and impactful ventures are led by young people or are emerging precisely from this type of environments like Guatemala or other Latin American countries. So the question is, what are some of the biggest misconceptions you've heard, and how can we challenge them?
Well, if you mean misconceptions about Guatemala, I'm not sure I'm an expert on that topic. But in general, in poorer countries and in Latin American countries, there's a sense of blaming the outside world. Now, that's not entirely wrong. The outside world is partly at fault. My country has done bad things to Guatemala. You have your complaints against Mexico, against El Salvador. A lot of that's correct. But at the end of the day, the countries that succeed all have their complaints. Denmark has a complaint against Nazi Germany for conquering the country for 5 years and ruling it in a very evil way. Denmark has another complaint against Germany, that the territory of southern Denmark was taken by Germany and to this day has never been given back. So the willingness to just do what is best anyway and focus on the forward-looking perspective, I think that is not sufficiently appreciated in many contexts. And again, most of the complaints about the outside world, they're true. So I'm not trying to talk you out of them. Sometimes they're worse than you think, I would say. But still, at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own situation and other people won't do it for you. So tell the outside parties who've treated you badly, say them some very nice curse words, and then get on with proving them wrong.
You remind me of underdevelopment is a state of mind, and how some people have this idea that maybe we haven't progressed because the United States or Spain came and plundered all our wealth, and they took, and therefore we sort of developed a mindset that we weren't able to develop. And today at lunchtime, you said, and you've said it in other places, that Latin America is really underappreciated in global economic conversations, and maybe
Latin American. Yeah.
yes, by the U.S. So, why are we underappreciated? Why aren't we on the radar, so to speak? And what specific comparative advantages do you see for countries like Guatemala in the next few decades?
I think I know why you're underrated. So the media universe in the English language is ruled by the United States. I think that's quite bad. If you go to London, they talk much more about my elections than their elections. I mean, that's their freedom of speech. They should have that liberty. But I don't actually think it's healthy. Ireland, Australia, the US media universe, especially with social media, is very strong. So from a US point of view, most voters see Latin America as an issue of immigration, migration, and of course that is an important issue. But that's all they see. Like, we're very self-centered in the United States. We're fairly provincial, you could say. Some of us, I'm mostly pro-immigration, others are anti-immigration. But if that's all you talk about, you'll be blind as to what's actually going on. And I went back, I used my GPT, and I saw that for the last 22 years, the average rate of economic growth in Guatemala has been 3.5%. Now, you might think it should be higher. Of course, it should be higher. But just ask, how many countries in this whole hemisphere have beaten that? I'm not sure, but my guess is Panama has done better. Possibly Dominican Republic has done better. Maybe Uruguay. I'm not sure there. But I can only think of 3, and that's a maybe. 3 that have beaten you. So you're all kicking butt, like in a modest kind of way. Like, you're doing well. No one outside talks about it. I don't know how much people here talk about it. That, to me, is a big story. Right now in the US, we talk about El Salvador a lot. Not about the economy, but, Trump, Bukele, they tweet at each other, whatever. I'm not saying that isn't something to talk about, but again, it's a distraction from the real story. The real story is that when I went to El Salvador in August and I asked the people about the economy, they all told me it was better here. So, a possible misconception is a lot of countries that are doing well don't always fully grasp. They're kind of succeeding in some basic ways. And my last visit here was 12 years ago, so I don't see the in-between years. From my admittedly subjective point of view, it's much richer. It just feels nicer. People seem happier. It's a better vibe. The city's more developed. It all just seems livelier. You see more people who are obviously not from wealthy families in shopping malls or buying things or having jobs that are not just service jobs. So I just see so much progress. And yeah, do better, but at the very least, keep it up.
Yeah, so building on that and this narrative around Latin America, our developing economies often do face certain barriers like informality or limited capital access, but I think that there are also some untapped potential. And so my question is, what strategic opportunities do you see in countries like Guatemala or other Central America, maybe, so we could pinpoint it to Guatemala and our partners or our neighbors, but what are those opportunities that you see in the long term to build better economies here?
Well, again, I'm giving you a subjective perspective. I've been here 4 times. That's something, but it hardly makes me an expert. Some people say the biggest problem here is corruption. It's not obvious to me that is correct. I tend to think the biggest problem is human capital. And simply turning Guatemala into truly one nation, which it both is and it isn't. So my previous visits here, I had much more of the sense that things were deeply split and fractured and on the verge of violence, and that indigenous groups were really quite separate from some other parts of the country. And again, these are just subjective impressions from a few days. Those are all still problems. They just seem to be much less, that there's been a lot of progress, a great deal of integration across cultures, languages, where people live, where people go, what kind of jobs they have, what their social networks are like. But there's still this quite big human capital deficit. And we know that today, the groups of people who are the poorest, who would, be the Mesoamericans, you could call them, earlier in history, they were some of the greatest scientific innovators the human race has ever seen. For instance, a wee bit north in Mexico, just breeding corn out of a weed, turning it into one of the most important foodstuffs the world has seen, which enabled the Industrial Revolution in Europe. And you look at the weed that corn came from, it's called what, teotin? And then you see corn, and they turned it into corn by selective breeding without even knowing what we would call Western science. It's this phenomenal achievement. So to get that human capital mobilized fully and contributing more to science, business, education, everything in Guatemala, it seems to me that will happen. It will happen much more slowly than it needs to. But I think, again, it's a subjective impression, but it's happening.
That's an example of an entrepreneurial spirit in the past. And I think that what we see now is a very entrepreneurial younger generation. People tend to be very innovative or looking for ways to establish their own businesses and for ways to take advantage of technology and technological progress. And these are all things that interest you deeply. In Guatemala, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor shows that we are very entrepreneurial, but a lot of our entrepreneurships are very small when they start and they fail part of the way. So I think maybe it would be really interesting to know how do you think younger people should take this inclination to develop their own businesses, to try to branch out and have very dynamic, I guess, growth paths, and how to take advantage of free markets and succeed.
Well, my sense is over the next 20, 30 years, Guatemala will make a true transition from being a commodities-based economy with coffee, chocolate, banana. None of that's going away. You're very good at that. But you'll just have more and more services, most of all in Guatemala City. And to build out those services based on the surpluses you've accumulated, there's a great number of opportunities for startups, businesses, often led by the young. You say most of them fail, but that's true in every country. It's true in Silicon Valley. You're not going to get around that. It's partly what attracts the risk-loving and the ambitious. So I would say just be ready for that. Have credit markets and safety nets in a way where people are willing to take those chances, a lot of family support. And again, you have about 18 million people. There's still a scale problem. It's the most populous compared to your neighbors, but it limits how big businesses can grow. And ideally, and this is not up to anyone in Guatemala, but Central America should be a larger economic unit with true integration across borders. You all can't manage that for the other countries. I hope it goes well. But you can at least imagine a future where much of Central America is a bit more like the EU in the freedom of trade sense. I don't mean in the massive bureaucracy sense. And then you would have these bigger markets, and your entrepreneurs, the entrepreneurs in the other countries, would have better chances because they'd be dealing with this larger market. Trade would be good, and it could all be freer. If you ever try to take a bus from one Central American country to another, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's a mixed experience, but that should be seamless, like driving, from Virginia to Maryland, from California to Nevada, and I think someday it will be, but all this intergovernmental cooperation is kind of a bureaucratic nightmare. It'll be much slower than it should be, but it is this big win out there that you can look forward to, and it's more likely to happen than not.
Yeah, and for businesses to grow, there has to be a certain framework that enables free trade, right? And so what do you think we should be promoting here in Guatemala? What kind of environment should we be promoting for business to grow, and also what role do young people play in this challenge, basically?
Well, I think predictability here is very important. There are a lot of complications surrounding 2024. I'm quite sure I don't understand them. But if I don't understand them, it means the rest of America also doesn't understand them. So just having a bunch of years in a row where nothing happens, I think would be pretty awesome. And I think the chances of that are quite good. I think brain drain, Guatemalans going to the United States will always be a problem. I don't think it has to be bad. It has not been bad for, say, India. The Indians who've gone to the US, they bring back a lot of investment, expertise, knowledge, not just remittances. So I think over time that will become more fruitful for Guatemala and the rest of Central America. You'll get more for the brain, get a kind of brain drain dividend, which you have not been reaping so far. So there's just a bunch of long-term forces. They're pretty invisible. No one quite manages or controls them, but they're going to kick in gently in your favor, and they'll add up to something that's pretty positive.
I'm really interested in your perspective on demographics, because we have a young population, and we have what they call sort of the demographic bonus. But women are increasingly delaying childbirth, and fertility rates are low. Even here in Guatemala, they're declining very rapidly. And in many countries in Latin America, well below the replacement level. So how do you think these demographic trends are going to affect economic productivity and the general well-being of the population?
Here's the good news for Guatemala. Compared to other Latin countries, you're mostly still younger, so you have decades before that becomes a problem. It will become a problem. Virtually all countries are likely to stay below replacement rate. I don't have a world global answer for that. I can say immigration, but that's for US. Like, not every country can take in net immigrants. And I'm not sure Guatemala is that well positioned to do it. Your immediate neighbors, well, Belize is much poorer, Honduras is poorer, but they may go to the US, or there's just not that many of them anyway to make such a difference. And they too will have declining fertility also. So maybe we're hoping robots and AI help us out on this. All I'll say is you have a head start on having a lot of young people. Don't waste it or squander it. Use it entrepreneurially to build out your service sector and have a safer, less risky economy. The more you can transition away from commodities, the more stable you will be, the less vulnerable you will be to global recession and so on, or outside tariffs. And again, all the trends there are in your favor. But there is this big long-term problem, and I don't have any answer for it, really, for any country.
Yeah, and using or taking into account this demographic bonus, there have been other cities like Tel Aviv or Tallinn or even Medellin here in Latin America that have built thriving entrepreneurial and innovative-driven communities while also respecting personal freedom, right? And so I was wondering if there are any lessons for Guatemala that we could take from other countries, knowing that we can't copy the exact same thing that other countries or other communities have done, but there might be some steps that could be taken that we should take into account as well.
Well, you mentioned Israel and Colombia. I'll make a comment on each of those. One thing Israel did completely right was to have super strong integration with the United States. So Israel, of course, is a small country, small number of people. But what they do, they're mostly selling to the American market. So it's like they are part of that market when it comes to tech and startups and military defense. They're so strongly integrated. And that's why any of it has been possible. Great relations with the US and immigrants who have kept ties in both places. So that's definitely something Guatemala can do. You're even more, you're in the same time zones. You're closer, 2-hour flight from Texas. You have these huge natural advantages. Now you mentioned Colombia. They seem to me a perpetual underperformer. I think they have quite a good work ethic, pro-American people. They're pretty pro-business, pretty pro-capitalist. But there's something in their culture, I don't understand it, but it seems broken, they keep on making unforced errors by having periodic bad leadership, bad policies, backsliding after a big win, like the peace agreement, that was great. And then there's all this backsliding. I couldn't tell you exactly why it happened, but just try to avoid backsliding. Like the better you do, there's a tendency to let up because maybe you didn't expect that much. And it's like, phew, we made it. And then you backslide. Once saw this in Chile also, a bit in Mexico. So, but the worst backslider, I think, probably has been Colombia because they have the most potential relative to performance. They have a lot of people, a lot of scale. Different parts of their cities actually work very well. You mentioned Medellin. Beautiful city, excellent transit system. It moved from being super dangerous to actually pretty safe in most parts. So again, they've had these huge wins and they're kind of pissing it away. So like learn that lesson from them and just stick with it. Like South Korea, they kept on growing. They never got complacent. They just, well, we're going to stick with this, execute, execute. They never said we're rich enough now, we can let up. And be more like that and less like what I've seen from Colombia.
With this bad leadership that you mentioned, is it something that can be explained in a way through public choice by maybe why people tend to elect governments that promise them a lot of things or that are populist in their discourse, how certain ideologies play into the political process? I don't know if we have this phrase here that we deserve the leadership we get, but do we really? I mean, sometimes we get these terrible leaders, and I'm looking at a lot of the people in the audience probably voted for the first time in the past election, or maybe they didn't even get a chance to vote, but they will in the next election. How do they keep from electing bad leaders? How do we do that?
Part of that is human capital, that people who are literate and informed, at least on average, make better decisions. But there's this other mysterious element to it. So public choice theory, it's very good at explaining when and why governments go wrong. And I very much agree with that. I'm a member of the Center for Study of Public Choice for 30 years and so on. But at the same time, I'm not sure public choice theory is very good at explaining differences. So if you look at the government of Uruguay, which is not really my views, I would say. I don't like all their policies or decisions. But in terms of executing and working and keeping things on track, you'd have to say they've done pretty well. And that country has been relatively successful, especially for its region. So why has Uruguay not been plagued by many of the problems, say, that have shown up in Colombia? I don't have a good answer to that. I don't think public choice does. I broadly feel somehow culture matters. I don't know if that's an explanation or just restating the initial question, a kind of tautology. But what your people really believe, I just think is critically important. And it includes religion, but I don't even mean mainly religion. What's their self-image, the image of their country, their sense of civic responsibility? And every place in the world has room for that to get better, and just keep on making it better.
And since you mentioned Uruguay, I was wondering if perhaps Singapore could be a similar example in the sense that they did transform themselves from a very poor country to one of the most competitive economies in the world in just a few decades. And so it was largely by creating a secure entrepreneurial environment, business-friendly environment. But I was wondering, do you think that kind of environment not only transform economies, but does it also transform societies?
There's a very strong sense of civic responsibility in Singapore. I've been there many times. I'm very fond of the place. They've done almost everything right, I would say. But in fairness to other countries, Singapore got very lucky in a number of ways. They were in Southeast Asia as a major trade and financial center, exactly when China was growing 10%, India started growing 6 to 8%, Vietnam was growing at high rates. So their immediate neighbors, so many of them, like the big important players, were doing phenomenally well. And that really pulled up Singapore a lot because there's the services in Singapore and the manufacturing fit perfectly to the growth of others. Now, here in Guatemala, if you look at your immediate neighbors, they're not really anything to envy in terms of growth. You're not surrounded by places growing at that rate. And even Panama has very much slowed down. And with the trade wars, Panama's probably not going to do well at all through no fault of their own. So the big place that can pull you up is the United States. It's always a bit of a mixed blessing, but the US probably will grow at 2 to 2.5%. It's not bad, but it's not like being surrounded by these tigers growing at 5 to 10%. So Singapore's record will be tough to beat. You shouldn't take that as your benchmark. But again, a country can always do better. Singapore right now, it's richer than the US. I go there, my jaw drops. I think a bit, gee, I live in a poor country that doesn't work that well. And relatively speaking, that's the correct impression.
You've spoken of civilizational ambition. What do you mean by that?
I think a lot of the West has had this in the past. Right now, Western Europe no longer has it. It's one reason they grow more slowly. The notion that you are building a great civilization, not just a country or a single culture, but an entire civilization. European classical liberalism of the 18th and 19th centuries had this vision so strong that it was about much more than any one country. It was about the future of mankind, and they would do it, and they kind of did it. And you look at the art, the music from that period, it's beautiful, it's phenomenal. We still listen to it, look at it. I think Latin America has that same potential. I've never really seen it believed or happen. But the notion that here, stretching from Mexico all the way down to the bottom, you can build what the world will envy as this new civilization, each country different, incredibly diverse. I've only felt any of that when I go to Brazil, and they have not succeeded at it. But you at least feel the tendency to want to do something large and huge and great and impressive. I think Latin America as a unit, I'm not saying every country will participate. Some countries will stay back, maybe Venezuela, Cuba, we'll see. But you can all do it and be a world cultural leader in a bigger way than you are now. And just be the future. If you ask, where in the world today are free trade ideas most popular? There was a column in the Financial Times today by Ruchir Sharma. It's debatable, but he said, right now, I think it's Latin America. It's not fully realized, but you have Malay, you have a number of other leaders who are trying to do, some good things, and they want freer trade rather than protectionism. You can run much further with that. Like the court is empty. My country screwing up. Western Europe does not believe in itself anymore. It's become a place of lower ambition. Here, there's aspiration. You don't take prosperity for granted. You have all these other countries, cultures you can work with. I wouldn't bet on it, but I know it can happen, and I dearly hope it does.
Thank you. And I'm a pretty huge fan of your articles in the Free Press, and you have one recently titled Welcome to a Weird and Wild Century. It's a lot like the 17th century. So I was wondering if what you just said has something to do with that.
In my article, I was referring to the 17th century in England. That was the beginnings of democracy and also the beginnings of the scientific revolution and print culture being something people could afford. It was also the founding of the Western version of what later became the United States. It was an incredibly eventful century. In that century, at least in much of England, people truly believed they could do great things, earth-shattering things, millennium-shattering things. The place today in the world that has that the most, one would be California. The other would be parts of China. I haven't been everywhere, but I don't see that feeling in too many parts of the world. 17th century England had it. 19th century Europe had it. Times that were either classically liberal or those ideas at least were brewing and growing. Western Europe, of course, most of you have been there. It's very nice. It's a great vacation. It's pretty. The food is good. It's like not that much you can say against it, but I've been going for 40 years. It's not really getting better. It's fine. But in that way, it's disappointing to me. It's not leading the world. It's way underperforming relative to human capital and history and traditions. So I think we're headed toward an era where more places will be like going for the big win and thinking big and thinking about change. And you all here can be one of those.
Talking about thinking big, you've been talking a lot about AI and the impact of AI on productivity. What advice would you give students preparing for a world where much of cognitive labor is automated or will be automated? And what careers or specific tasks or industries do you think will be the most and the least affected by AI advancements?
I gave a whole talk on this earlier. Did they tape it?
Probably.
Probably they taped it, but I'll just say a few things. You know, most jobs won't go away, but you will have to work with AI. So I can't tell you what job to take or what career to pursue. But whatever you're doing, realize that 2/3 of your workflow, or maybe more, will involve dealing with AI. It will be more pleasant than the current versions of those jobs. AI is best at doing the repetitive parts of the work for you, but you'll have to know what you're doing with it, or you'll kind of be worthless. Like a factory worker who doesn't know how to operate a machine, that will be you. I don't care if you think you're a great doctor, lawyer, or whatever. If you can't work with the AI, you lose. So study AI, keep abreast on the models. It's changing rapidly. Have some circles of friends where you talk about it, experiment, trade tips. There's no single magic bullet. Just don't be asleep and be ready when the time comes. Be flexible in your mind. It means the world will change a lot. What a given job consists of will change a lot. I've already changed my life quite a bit because of AI. And have that flexibility and interest. And that's what I think you should do. There's not a single recipe or cookbook, but this general notion of being entrepreneurial and realizing you're in a market that will probably change more rapidly in the next 5 years than it has in the last, 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, and also building on that, when talking about AI, there's always this ethical component that comes up. And so I was wondering if there's also an ongoing debate if markets are ethical and if AI has this ethical component. I was just wondering, what's your perspective, or what do you think about if markets promote ethical behavior, or if it fully depends on institutions or our civic culture? But how do these forces interact, or how do young people can see them, and how does personal responsibility also comes into it?
That's a complex question. The main AIs right now, of course, they're from private businesses. They're not from governments. And those businesses act like businesses. So they want to make money. That's mostly a good thing. It means they want to build AIs that are useful to you and don't somehow trick you or mislead you or do something other than what you ask it to do. So that enforces a good kind of cooperativeness and obedience. But look, businesses are imperfect, and part of it falls on you as the consumer. Like, monitor the product. Look at what you're paying for. Look at what you're using. Look at what you're doing with it. There are bad ways of using AI. You can use AI to spy on people if you want, especially the really strong advanced systems. If you ask it about people you know, it'll make guesses. A lot of times those guesses are right. Like, if you, who of these people is most likely to be an alcoholic or something? Like, maybe it's not your business. So as an individual, like, markets are made of individuals. Individuals need a strong code of ethical guidance, all the more so with AI. I don't think that involves any great sacrifice on your part. The things AI is really good for are the highly ethical uses. So you're not having to leave a lot of money on the table, but just be careful and thoughtful with it, the way you would, with anything else you do or with people you deal with, and realize it's a tool. Yes, the company has its responsibilities, but ultimately you're the source of the money and you're the one using it. Number one responsibility is yours.
You've stressed a lot of that. I think you do it in Stubborn Attachments, and I think in other books, that we should be thinking not only of our future or our generation's future, but of future generations, and that in itself is an ethical way of proceeding. So when we make economic decisions, we should be thinking of our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Can you elaborate on that?
I have 2 grandchildren now, which is great. You want to leave them a wealthier economy, a reasonably well-functioning political system, and strong institutions, including, I might add, Fransisco Marroquín, which you all contribute to. That's the most important thing you can do, especially the institutions. If you leave them good institutions, their chance of doing well is very, very high. And that's an intangible thing, good institutions. There's not a single way to measure it or a single thing you can put your finger on, but you know it when you see it. And when there's bad institutions, you know it when you see those. And just do everything you can so that your family, your school, the business you work in, that, as you pass from this earth, that you leave behind something better than what you started with. And you're basically all going to be in a position to do that. But just as a duty, I would say take that very, very seriously. You can think of it as a major reason why you're here on earth, because the line of humankind will extend for a very long time to come. So anything you leave, in turn, gets left again and again and again. So you're not just benefiting one person, you're benefiting the whole chain, and you're setting an example for your descendants. So there's this multiplicative force to your good and ethical decisions of individual responsibility today. And people, I wish, would see that more clearly.
And also building on what you were saying, I was wondering what role does the government have in this, in building strong institutions or promoting innovation? Because too often I sense that people think that the government should promote innovation or it's the government's job to do it. But I think that in ecosystems like ours or what's happening in Guatemala, private initiatives, grassroots movements, Universidad Fransisco Marroquín and other academic partnerships not only have a huge potential, but are also the ones that are driving innovation and doing what has to be done. And so I just wanted to know your take on which alliances do you see are essential for fostering strong institutions and innovation that is built independently?
Well, I agree very much with everything you said. But if I think like what here exactly should the government do? Again, with the qualifier, I'm no expert about this place, but building better roads would make sense to me. Working with the neighboring countries to have better trade ties would make sense to me. Again, you can't do that on your own. They have to cooperate. But, it has to be a thing that can be improved. Just predictability. And in terms of reputation, I think Guatemala, in fact, is very tourist friendly. And again, to be here 4 times is a reasonable number of visits, but it does not have the reputation that, say, Costa Rica has. For me, Costa Rica is much more boring than Guatemala. I hope I'm not offending anyone here, but I would much rather come to Guatemala. I've been to Costa Rica once, which I enjoyed, and Guatemala 4 times. And that tells you something, right? Demonstrated preference, the Austrians can say. But the world doesn't know that. And you could earn much more from tourism revenue, also from Mexico and Europe, without endangering what is great here. And in fact, it would offer some more financial support to some of your local arts and crafts and villages, and it would lower the desire to migrate. So I wouldn't say that government intervention will do that, but there might be some way in which your government can behave and project this positive image that would help the private sector achieve that end. And that strikes me as another good thing your government could do. It doesn't even cost a lot of money. It's an attitudinal shift, and it seems to me eminently possible.
I'm going to ask you a more personal question.
They're all personal questions, I would say, but go on.
In this AI age, how do you personally decide which ideas, which books, which people are worth your time, even which countries, since you've been traveling a lot? How do you decide where to invest your time?
If that's a personal question, I'll give you a very personal and idiosyncratic answer. I'm not actually very rational in such choices. So I just get attached to things. I have this book, the title is Stubborn Attachments. It's kind of a pun about myself. So I decided some while ago, like I had as a personal project, I wanted to visit every major city or area of this hemisphere, of the New World. I cannot rationally defend that desire. It's been great fun. It, I think, helps those countries if I spend a small amount of money there. I learn a lot. I've picked up some Spanish. It satisfies my curiosity. I never have jet lag. I love the foods here. You know, those chicken tamales here are incredible, fried chicken. And so I have this thing and I do it. And I can't really defend it, but I'm just going to keep on doing it. You mentioned AI. So I have become friends with a lot of people who work on AI. I'm in regular touch with them. I learn a lot from them. They learn some things from me. That's been very rewarding. I go to San Francisco much more often than I used to, and I have a better time when I'm there. So that's something I've grown attached to. I used to think, well, I now need to go off and tramp through all the different countries of Central Asia, which would be interesting, to be sure. But I don't actually think I will. I think I'm more likely to come back to Guatemala, Central America. I've never been to Paraguay. And as you hear me talking, I hope it's sinking into you that none of this makes complete sense. Just you actually should get attached to things and pursue them with great curiosity, and it will enrich your life. And you don't have to defend it all rationally. So that would be my personal answer to your question.
On that note, I would also like to ask you what kind of advice or any recommendation you would give to young entrepreneurs that want to stay true to their purpose and do this without falling behind.
Well, the trivial answer to that question is to stay true to your purpose. But at a more deeper level, I think I've noticed the following in many years of working with founders and entrepreneurs, that at the beginning, they underrate how much they are capable of. And the value of a role model or a positive demonstration effect or someone having faith or belief in them can be very high. And you can show such a person a very small amount of information with a small amount of your time. It's not some big cost. And all of a sudden, a light will go off in their head and they will see. It's like Krishnerian alertness. They will see that a different future is possible. And that different future, it's actually a lot more ambitious than what they started with. And people on their own typically cannot get to that higher level of ambition, whether it's Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or someone, from Comalapa. It doesn't happen on their own. They need help. They need role models. They need help from younger people, from older people. So just realize that about yourself. You need to see the multiple steps further. The people you're working with, they need to see the multiple steps further. Maybe you can help them do so. And my advice would be to internalize that framework and live it, to raise your own aspirations and those of the people around you in a very positive, constructive way, most of all by being positive yourself.
That's really nice advice. Another personal question.
Okay, another personal answer then.
You have written a great number of books, and they reveal an interdisciplinary worldview. You wrote The Great Stagnation, The Complacent Class, An Economist Gets Lunch, and In Praise of a Commercial Culture, just to name a few. My question would be, what's your favorite book? And another follow-up question would be, what's next?
Well, when people ask, what's your favorite book? I always like to say my next one. And my next book will have the simple title, Mentors. How to be a good mentor. Also, how to find a good mentor. And if you wish to be mentored, how to be a good mentee. How to be mentor worthy. In my opinion, there's no really good systematic book on mentorship. And I've just started this. It's less than halfway done, but I'm working on it. That will be my next book. And I'll just be writing every day for the Free Press and on my blog and doing podcasts until I just can't do it anymore. So that's my basic plan. And I'm living my plan, and I'm just going to keep on doing it. That sounds, in a way, non-thinking. It sort of is non-thinking. I wake up every morning. I'm pretty happy. I'm productive every day. I'm not so much re-examining all the time what I should be doing. I'm pretty busy, and just kind of get at it and hope that's also this positive example that shows other people that by sticking with things, you really can get pretty far.
Well, these have been very insightful answers from yours, Dr. Cowen. And now we would like to also open the floor for some questions from the audience, if anyone has a question.
Hi. I had a question relating to AI and how, my question is, how do you think having knowledge using AI is gonna affect the future world in applying for jobs and like for young people to acquire like better positions in different businesses. How do you think having knowledge in, like, for example, an AI minor would help?
An AI minor would be great. You know, Toby Lutka, the Canadian entrepreneur, he runs Shopify. He just issued a company memo. You can read it online, where he said, we're only going to hire people who can work with AI very well coming in and who want to keep on doing so. More and more companies will do that. But if you're graduating now, I don't know how it is in Guatemala. It's probably different. But I think the US right now is a more difficult time than usual. There's a lot of companies, they've been told AI is important, but they don't know what they're doing. So they're waiting a bit. And entry-level hires have slowed down for this reason. And the job market, while it's fine overall, it's right now below average for entry-level hires. I think we'll turn a corner where these companies pretty soon figure out, okay, AI is a thing. Now here's what we're going to do. And then they'll hire a lot of people who will use it well. But there's the short-term transition that's more difficult than usual. And I don't know when it will end, but I would just caution you. I'm not saying it's the same here, it probably isn't. But something like that will spread here at some point. I would just say be ready for that and realize levels of uncertainty, where you should work, what you should do, what you should learn. For everyone, they're going to be higher than usual. That goes along with greater opportunity. It doesn't have to be bad, but it definitely will be higher uncertainty.
Thank you.
I was wondering, you were referred to as Silicon Valley's favorite economist. I just wanted your thoughts on that statement and what do you think got you in that position?
Well, first, I'm not sure it's true. When journalists write things about you, they need to make up catchphrases that will grab the attention of the audience. That obviously grabbed your attention, and that's why it was put into the article. But that said, I have a lot of friends in Silicon Valley, many of whom you've heard of, and I've learned a great deal from them, and I enjoy hanging out with them. I think overall they're both good people and truly great American business leaders. I don't think it's true for all of them. I don't want to draw lines here and name names. But on a whole, America has been blessed with some very, very good leaders in California now who really care about like the quality of their business. And they're just super, super sharp individuals. And, you know, I feel humbled when I talk to the AI. I feel humbled when I talk to them. And I'm very lucky to know them at all and have a chance to learn from them. And I'm always trying to help out and give them something back that maybe they learn from me. Now, like, how did that happen? Some of it is luck. But I think part of it, like, I'm from the East Coast. The East Coast is very kind of mercenary. You're always expecting you do something for money. What will they pay me? The tech community, it's different. Like, yes, it's all about money. That's not wrong. But the norm is you volunteer and you do things for free, and you hope people do you favors in return. So a lot of people I know, they approached like West Coast money, wanting money for themselves. I feel I approached it with some understanding of the norm, that I should not be doing it for money. I should be giving of myself, and not in fact expecting anything concrete in return. And I think showing that I understood that norm, whereas a lot of other Americans did not, I think that helped me quite a bit in that world. And I think there's also a premium on expressing yourself well in a certain way, where I've tried to do a good job at that over the years, and that would be another reason why it happened. And my attitudes are generally pretty pro-tech. That obviously helps with people who do tech. So that would be some reasons why it happened, but partly, like, it may not be entirely true.
Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. And I remember that the conversation started talking about the GDP and growing. And I think the modern world is a little bit obsessed with the GDP. And through the conversation, you taught a lot of other things that are good signs of growing in countries, like in institutions, or this kind of sentiment that you observed in California. The very case of California, I think there are many Californias around the world inside of countries. I mean, economies are diverse. And inside the same country that is measured by the same GDP, there are different cases of Californians or communities that are growing and that are providing better life for their citizens than others. And I think we should be looking at something else to try to replace GDP. Do you have some idea what can be used as a replacement for GDP in the future?
Well, actually, I don't want to replace GDP. I'm one of those people obsessed with it. I think it's a pretty good metric for a lot of the other things we care about. It's not perfect. If you look at countries with one resource like oil, it completely breaks down. But for most normal countries, if I just ask, if I want to be randomly born into a country, which countries would I pick? It would be US, Canada, Australia, Sweden, Denmark, Singapore, Germany, London, like the high GDP places. And it's no accident that those coincide. But I agree, more matters than GDP. I'll make an observation. It's very positive. When I'm here in Guatemala, I have the casual impression that this country is better at turning GDP into happiness than most other countries I visit. There's something about how close ties are maintained here, where I think you've been quite successful, that is not picked up in your GDP number. And I just see more people smiling than sometimes I would in a much richer country. So that's something you've all done a great job on, as far as I can tell. Maybe I'm wrong, just my impression. But kudos to you all. It's great.
Oh, hello, Tyler. Thanks for your great insights. I just want to ask you, what do you think about the effect of artificial intelligence is going to have on economic ideas, economic beliefs? Is this going to create more convergence towards, support for free markets? It's going to create more divergence? It's going to depend on the context? It's going to depend on age? I don't know. What do you think about that?
Right now, the current AI models, they're pretty centrist in their orientation. So they're not going to make people free market the way you might find at Marroquín. But I think it will hurt the left and Marxism very much. Because you ask those models questions, they give you straightforward answers rooted in good microeconomics. They're really pretty good. And some of the models have been trained by economists and improved in this manner. I think what's also true, the models are best at short chains of thought. And in my opinion, good economic arguments are pretty intuitive and involve fairly short chains of thought centering around basic ideas with prices, markets, secondary consequences, spontaneous order. The models are good at those. It plays to their strengths. So I think it will help us a bit. It's not going to make the world libertarians or classical liberals, but it will be more of a positive than a negative. And most of all, it will hurt the extreme left. So I'm optimistic there.
Hello, I would like to ask a question from your point of view. How would you define social entrepreneurship? That I think, especially for this audience, is very important to understand your definition, because there are a variety of definitions of social entrepreneurship.
Sometimes these days when people ask me definitions, I know I'll get a better answer if I pull out the AI and ask it. So that would be my first answer. But if I have to say on the spot, I think of it as entrepreneurial activities aimed at solving some social problems, like microcredit would be an example, migration assistance could be an example, Pueblo infrastructure could be an example, but that it also hopes to make money or at least break even and be sustainable. And that's social entrepreneurship. It's a great thing. I'm all for it. There's plenty of room to do it more. I think Latin America actually has an excellent tradition in what it's done so far. They've built up a lot of human capital in that area. It's just a question of scaling it more, converting it more, doing it more consistently on more different areas. And you go to, like different pueblos, and you see they have all these new problems. Like some of them, just pollution from plastic is a new problem. It's sort of a nice problem to have. It's way better than not accessing consumer goods at all. But still, at some point, you've got to do something about it. You can't just let the plastic or the other forms of pollution build up. And those will be addressed by social entrepreneurship. So it's a never-ending fight. You solve some problems, people become wealthier, new problems arise, but you keep on climbing that ladder of prosperity and opportunity, and I think we're going to do that.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the conference. I really enjoyed it. So at one point of the whole conversation, it was mentioned that Singapore and how it was capable of transforming from a very poor country to one of the most wealthiest nations. And one of the main factors was like the wealth of Singapore's neighbors, and how Guatemala does not have the same that kind of factor. So, however, education was also a key factor in contributing to the transformation of the country's wealth. So, knowing that our neighbors do not possess the same levels of wealth as China, for example, do you think Guatemala would it was still be possible to build a knowledge-based economy similar to the one that Singapore has?
I don't think there's a realistic chance of matching Singapore on being a knowledge-based economy. But I do think there's a realistic chance of being one of the 5 or 6 wealthiest countries in Latin America. And you would be much better off and would truly be, the upper tiers of middle income status. And that can happen well within your lifetimes and even within my lifetime. So I would aim for that. I don't think you can be such a major place for multinationals and pharmaceuticals and international trade, just given your location. I don't mean that as any criticism of any particular policy. Singapore is so uniquely well placed as a connecting point for other parts of the world. Singapore has done such a good job on cultivating its human capital, and Guatemala still needs to do that more. I doubt if Singapore is the correct model, because the Singaporean culture, it's so different from here. If people here are relatively happy compared to GDP, I think in Singapore they're relatively unhappy compared to GDP. There's a lot of social pressure. Families are pretty disciplinarian. It does get a lot of work out of the kids. It doesn't feel like that happy a country to me. I would look at other successful models of Latin education. Marroquín, of course, is one of them. But look at places like Uruguay, the high points in Mexico, which does have some high points in Brazil, Chile. Not copy them, but those are maybe better models to learn from, and try to be more like those places. And again, I don't see any reason why Guatemala cannot be as rich as the wealthiest parts of, say, Mexico are now. Right now, you're quite a ways behind. You're not that far behind Mexico in general, but somewhere like Monterrey in Mexico, which is pretty wealthy, that's something you can plausibly strive for and get most of the way or all of the way there. But again, this human capital deficit has to be addressed through some measures and policies. I'm not the one to tell you exactly what they are, but I think that's where I would focus my attention.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cowen. This has been a great afternoon, and we really appreciate this conversation, and thank you all for coming.